So we only really have one thing here, diabesity. Some people it manifests as obesity, and some people it manifests in diabetes, and in 90% of those people, they will end up with the other symptom.
First and foremost, this is a big topic, and it's a new term for a lot of folks, so I would love if you could talk a little bit about diabesity. What is it, and what is the current situation that we're facing in our culture regarding diabesity?
Most important, Shawn, diabesity is not a term I made up. And this is really important. Like, this is the highlight of our conversation. I don't want to peak too soon. But when we say the term diabesity, people are like, wow, like, Jonathan, that's a clever term you came up with. I didn't come up with that term, and this is the issue. Diabesity is an established medical condition. But people think I made it up. And not only is it an established medical condition, but it is the single largest cause of death and healthcare economic burden in the United States. It's the co-occurrence of diabetes and obesity, and it's affecting about 1 in 3 of us. And according to Dr. David Ludwig at the Harvard Medical School, it is the reason why, unless we do something, the current generation of children, and I know we're both fathers, so this literally gives me chills every time I say it, have a lower life expectancy than we do. And that is, like, the thing that is causing that is a thing whose name people think I made up. So talk about a lack of awareness and something that we have got to pay attention to right now.
Yeah. And so this is a combination, which these two do go hand to hand most often, but it's not always the case, because you can be in a state of obesity and not necessarily have diabetes, but again, they often go together. And also you can have diabetes without being in a state of obesity. And so, but these are two of our biggest causes of mortality in our country. A lot of folks don't realize, for example, with obesity, this is related to over 400,000 deaths a year in and of itself. But it's just, we categorize and record deaths in a very strange way. And that's still getting worked out right now as we speak. But so this right now, it's obviously at an epidemic proportion, beyond epidemic proportions, really pandemic, even endemic in a sense. And if you could, can you share a little bit more about what we're facing? Like, what are the components of this situation? How do we get into this place where we're at in the first place?
The most important thing, Shawn, for everyone to understand is that there could be like, oh, diabetes, it's diabetes and obesity put together, but that's actually not what it is, and sort of potentially that misunderstanding is what got us here. So it is going to answer your question. So a lot of people may have observed that there are diabetic people who are not obese and obese people who are not diabetic, but what the medical literature is starting to allude to is that diabetes and obesity are symptoms of the same underlying metabolic disease. And I would suggest, and the research suggests, that that same underlying metabolic disease, which in some people results in obesity first, and in some people results in diabetes first, is called diabesity. So we only really have one thing here, diabesity. Some people it manifests as obesity, and some people it manifests in diabetes, and in 90% of those people, they will end up with the other symptom eventually. But here's why this is so important, Shawn, is that, first of all, obesity, which we know is quite common, is more often than not treated as a medical issue. It's treated as a source of shame, as a character flaw. And in a lot of cases, Shawn, diabetes is starting to be treated that way as well. But if you tell someone that you just got diagnosed with cancer, you will get a much different response than if you tell somebody you just got a diabetes diagnosis, right? So diabetes and obesity are kind of put in this category of shame-related character flaws rather than medical conditions for a lot of people. And because of that, they're not given the scientific and also just compassionate attention that they deserve. the reason that awareness of diabesity and the relationship between these two things is so important is because, one, it will help to get these diseases into the disease category as they deserve, into the scientific category as they deserve, into the compassionate treatment category that they deserve. And it will also give them the importance they deserve. And here's what I mean, Shawn. Oftentimes, so there's a, I know we have I love your show because we have enough time to get deep into stuff. So I'm going to potentially jump off a ledge here and you might have to reel me back. But so often there is this extremely important, and this is something we talk about in our upcoming film, idea that it's essential to love yourself no matter how big or small or tall or short or anything that you are. And that's true, right? There is nothing about your physical appearance that says anything about your worth as a person. And if you have cancer, we need to do something about that. And if you have diabesity, we need to do something about that. So this idea of loving yourself, this idea of being compassionate, this idea of embracing everybody is not mutually exclusive with putting the utmost priority in ensuring that we're not slowly dying of diabesity. And that's a really important distinction. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, man, because you just brought up a great distinction that I think is kind of rattling around in our minds, whether we acknowledge it or not, which is when you hear that somebody's diagnosed with cancer, it's as if, this happened to you. But you hear about diabetes or you hear about diabetes or obesity, and it's you did this to yourself. And in both instances, we're taking away the co-creation and the possibility of you being able to do something about any of this. And on the other side, we're also, in a sense, placing blame for one and not the other. When in reality, these are things that we can co-create. But I think the big lacking part here, obviously, is education around how these things manifest in the first place. Because, there's a big running idea and even in our field, this is what I was told by physicians very early on in my career. These are things that just happen. And that's abandoning all laws of physics, like just basic principles of physics and reality. Things don't just happen. And so we can do something about these things. And also, especially, we can do something to start to change them. And so this is what I want to ask you about next, because within this construct, in this container, with diabesity and these prevailing issues of obesity and blood sugar disorders, things like that, one of the big breakthroughs, and you're one of the people who really press this into popular culture, is this very fundamental. It's really a truth. It's kind of in the context of a theory, but it's a truth about how the human body works, and it's called the Setpoint Theory. So can you talk about what that is?
What's been beautiful about even just the past 5 years, Shawn, and the time we spent recently at Harvard Medical School is there is this thing called the set point. And up until about the past 5 years, it was called the Setpoint Theory. But now it's just called Setpoint. And it's pretty much understood that the human body, and not the human body, but basically all organisms on the planet, work to maintain balance automatically. I mean, not to get too metaphysical, but like even the planet itself, like the reason there's life on this planet and there isn't life on the sun is that this planet has a balance, right? It doesn't get to be negative 500 degrees on this planet. It also doesn't become positive 1,000 degrees on this planet. There's a range in which life can exist on this planet, and there's a range in which life can exist in the world that is the human body. Because this is a world of complexity in and of itself. I mean, each cell is its own world when you really get down to it. So even the systems within the body work this way, right? Your blood sugar automatically maintains balance within a specific range. And if your blood sugar starts to get too high, your body does things to bring it back down. If it's too low, your body does things to bring it back up. Same thing applies to blood pressure, right? We understand that they're balanced automatically. The term for this is homeostasis. So we already know that essential systems in your body, which if they didn't take care of themselves automatically, you would die, take care of themselves automatically. Otherwise, you would die. So energy works that way as well, right? If you have an abundance of energy in perpetuity, you die. If you don't have enough energy in perpetuity, you die. So energy balance is a homeostatic system, otherwise known as a set point. You have a set range of energy that your body will work to maintain. And when I say energy that your body will work to maintain, how does your body store energy? Well, your body stores energy is by and large in fat tissue. So if we just take all that and put it together, it means that your body automatically regulates the amount of fat you store on your body around a set range, or it's called a set point. And instead of us trying to like starve our way, fight our way against that range, we need to learn why that range can become elevated and why we can bring that range back down. And Shawn, here's the big distinction that's happened recently that's taken this away from the realm of theory. If you think about the way we define diseases, for example, what is diabetes? Diabetes is the breakdown of the body's ability to automatically regulate blood sugar. That's what diabetes is. You can't regulate blood sugar automatically anymore, so you have to start taking insulin and other medications to do it manually. What is hypertension? Hypertension is the definition we've given to when your body can't regulate blood pressure automatically anymore. So Shawn, what is obesity? Obesity is the name we give to the disease which describes the body's inability to balance your weight automatically around a healthy range. That range has become elevated, it's become changed, and the answer is to change that, like the cure for diabesity, for diabetes, for obesity, is to re-enable your body to balance those systems around a healthy range.
So good. And this is applicable for if we're underweight, if we're at a quote normal weight, or if we're overweight. The body just is wanting, it reaches a state of homeostasis and it gets comfortable, and all of these metabolic systems operate in that place. And I know you've experienced this where, you know, when you were younger trying to gain weight, and like no matter what you do, we're taking in 5,000 calories, whatever, and it's so hard to gain weight. You might work at it for, you know, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, gain a couple of pounds, and your body will quickly revert right back to where it was if you don't keep putting that pressure on yourself. But it's the way that we go about it in the first place that makes the difference. And the same thing applies with bringing that weight back down. The body, it gets into that place, that set point, which I love the analogy of it being like a thermostat that's set in your body. So let's talk about where that thermostat is essentially located, and also what are some of the real underlying causes that the body's set point can become dangerously high and even stuck in a certain position.
It's important to understand, because I've gotten this question before, that there isn't like a place in your brain called the set point. So I just want to clarify that the set point is a way, it's an abstraction to help us understand all of these things that we've talked about, right? If you think about it, you even have a hydration set point, right? You drink a lot of water, what happens? You automatically urinate more. You don't drink enough water, you automatically urinate less. So what you have in your body is a series of feedback loops that communicate with each other for all of these different systems. Generally, if you want to, like, we only have an hour here, we're going to talk about your brain, your gut, and your hormones. So your brain obviously is your brain. So it's how your body takes in stimulus through your senses and how it makes sense of the outside world. It's also how it communicates to other parts of your body. Your gut is often called your second brain. And part of that is because your gut is also taking in inputs from the outside world. It's taking them in and digesting them. And if you want to, you can think about your hormones as sort of the language, or one of the languages that your brain and your gut use to communicate with each other, to help your body interact from the internal perspective to the outside world. So where is the set point? There is not sort of a place for the set point, but the set point, the series of set points that sustain you as a human being, are a series of feedback loops that are taking place between your brain, your gut, and your hormones. And diseases that are characterized by a dysregulated set point happen when something in the brain, the gut, the hormones, or all three of them prevent that feedback loop from happening efficiently or effectively. Like one example of this would be insulin resistance, which a lot of people are familiar with, right? When you become insulin resistant, it's not that your body doesn't produce insulin. It still produces insulin. It's just that it can't sort of hear the insulin. It can't act on the insulin. There is a conversation that should be happening metaphorically that isn't. There's a breakdown in communication. There's a breakdown in that feedback loop. So that is essentially, what is the set point? It's a series of feedback loops. What causes these disease states, such as hypertension, diabesity, the breakdown in that communication or in those feedback loops.
Perfect. And, in your new film, which is just so exciting, by the way, and I got the opportunity to see it early. The new film is called Better, and you've got a series of some of the most incredible researchers and scientists. And as you mentioned, one of them being Dr. David Ludwig, and he's an endocrinologist out of Harvard University. And he talked about something that, for years, and even, I've pressed this into popular culture recently. And I love that you talked about this. It's not just one location. It's this. And this is the thing about humans. We tend to isolate things into parts, right? And so it's this interconnection between the gut and the brain. Primarily, it's a big portion of this because your gut is determining, front line, what's getting absorbed into the body. And in the film, he talks about, the hypothalamus obviously being a master regulator of your metabolism, and that downstream connection that it has between the gut and the hypothalamus, right? And so one of these underlying causes, you just mentioned insulin resistance, for example, but in the film, he also talks about hypothalamic inflammation being one of these big triggers that can get that set point stuck. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Whether it's your brain breaking down, your gut breaking down, or your hormones breaking down, as you said, Shawn, there's been so much conversation about like insulin is the problem, or fat is the problem, or carbs is the problem. Like, it's much more nuanced than that. And it's much more holistic than that. One of the primary areas of breakdown that is not discussed when speaking about diabetes, obesity, or diabesity is neurological inflammation, or in this specific example you mentioned, hypothalamic inflammation. And what this is when literal inflammation, we're all familiar with inflammation, is happening in your brain itself. And this is causing your brain to not be able to hear messages from your body properly. A specific example of this is when leptin is unable to do its job anymore. So leptin is secreted in proportion to the amount of fat that you have on your body. It's, as much as we can understand it at this time, one of the points of the hormone leptin is to help your brain understand how much energy you have stored on your body in the form of body fat or triglyceride, so that your brain can regulate calories in and calories out automatically to help balance that. If leptin levels drop, theoretically, your brain should hear that, I don't have enough stored energy to keep me healthy. I better eat more and move less, and vice versa. But what we see is that in diabetes patients, it's not that they have a shortage of leptin. In fact, in some diabetes patients, they may have 25 times the amount of leptin circulating in their bloodstream as a non-diabetes patient. But what we see is, due to hypothalamic inflammation, that leptin isn't heard in the brain. The brain can't hear what the leptin is trying to say. So you can see, you can really see how hard your body's trying. It's producing leptin at 25 times the normal rate, screaming to your brain, I have enough energy stored. I have enough energy stored. I have enough energy stored. But due to this hypothalamic inflammation, those words go unheard. And Shawn, one way to think about this, which I think really gives anyone who hears it a cause for pause, and that rhymed so you know it's true, is if you think about an individual who's severely diabetes, so an individual who's suffering with hundreds of pounds of excess fat on their body, let's say someone who weighs 400 pounds, and let's say that person has a healthy weight of 160 pounds. This individual is storing, they have hundreds of thousands of calories of energy in their body already, literally pre-digested, ready to go. But their brain is telling them, you're hungry. You need to eat more. Just let that sink in for a second. A person who has hundreds of thousands of calories of energy inside of them already has a brain which is making them continue to be hungry. How does that work? It doesn't work. It's indicating a breakdown in fundamental metabolic and neurological function. And that's why, Shawn, this is like, that's a big deal. Like when you think about like what's happening when you have cancer? What's happening when you have cancer is your body's ability to replicate cells has broken down. Like it's gone haywire. Diabesity is your metabolism, your neurology, your gastroenterology going haywire. It's not a character flaw. You're not trying hard enough. You're in a severe disease state and you need and deserve help and compassion just like a cancer patient would.
So good. And these are the things that are not really getting addressed at multiple levels. And this is why a film like this is so important. You know that the primary medium for a lot of folks where they're consuming their education, which we can use that term loosely if we're talking about what's on the TV, you know, the news and all that stuff. But that's a powerful method of consumption. And so putting this kind of information into that medium, I'm so proud and happy for you, man, because this is the conversation that's not being talked about. You know, so people are believing that they're fundamentally broken in a sense and that their character is the flaw, as you mentioned. In reality, how many diet programs are talking about addressing the neuroinflammation, the inflammation in the brain to help to heal the body so that we can change the set point? Another one of those aspects, you mentioned this earlier when you mentioned insulin resistance of the cells, this came up for me as well, which again, we get into this vicious circle where we do feel trapped. And another part of that, so it's not just inflammation in the brain, but it's also inflammation with the fat cells themselves, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, because the fat cells, when you mention insulin leptin resistance, the fat cells are responsible for producing leptin. So the more body fat we have, we're producing it, but it's being able to read the signal. Throw into the mix these inflamed fat cells pumping out their own inflammatory compounds. Wow, we can really get into a messy situation.
And Shawn, it gets worse. And I don't want to paint like too bleak of a picture because I mean, we haven't even talked about gut dysbiosis yet, right? And so that you've got your cells, your hormones going haywire, you have your brain on fire, and then you have trillions of let's call them inappropriate bacterium or destructive bacterium in your stomach, which are potentially the source of some of that appetite dysregulation. I mean, we've now seen research which shows that sometimes if someone is feeling cravings, it's not actually them that's craving, it's the billions of unhealthy bacteria in their gut craving the substances that feed them, which are not substances that lead to positive health. And you know, we can really get into detail about like just how broken your gut can be and just how broken your hormones can be and how broken your brain can be. But what's really exciting, and this gets back to the point you made earlier, Shawn, is I think because of the way the pharmaceutical industry works, it's not a criticism, it's just, you know, the way the pharmaceutical industry is marketed is, oh, you have high blood pressure, you take this pill. Oh, you have this condition, you take this pill. So we have a mental model. So I'm an engineer by trade. So I'm going to use some engineering terms if that's okay, right? The way we think the body works is you do this thing for this result. So that's our mental model of how the body works, right? You want big biceps, you do bicep curls. When you and I both know that, yes, biceps curls will impact your biceps, but you could also squat and increase the size of your biceps, but that's a separate podcast. So that you don't have this one-to-one relationship in the body. And what's good about that is if you can understand that, the treatment for all of this, because I get questions every week, Shawn, well, will this help me with this? Will this help me with this? Will this? Look, this fundamental approach to life, this better approach to eating and thinking and living, which focuses on increasing the quality of what we're putting into our body and mind, rather than focusing on the quantity of what we're putting into our body, This addresses all of those things simultaneously. So as dark and complicated as this may seem, the body is beautifully resilient. The body doesn't want to be diabetes. In fact, it has myriad mechanisms to, like, if you kind of help it along, it will heal itself. I mean, and think about it. That's how the body works, Shawn. If you break your arm, the only way it heals is if you get out of the body's way. We call that putting a cast on it, and let the body heal itself. So we can do the same thing with this hypothalamic inflammation and this cellular inflammation and this gut dysbiosis by identifying foods that are truly life-sustaining and mindsets that are truly life-sustaining and lifestyle habits and relationships that are life-sustaining, focusing on those things, focusing on living better. And just like a sort of cascade of badness exists in a diabetes state, a cascade and self-reinforcing system of betterment can exist.
Yes, yes. This is so important because truly weight gain is a symptom and it's a natural response. Like our bodies are always trying to protect us and to help to manage us and to reach homeostasis. And this quote is directly from the film, and it was the one that I wrote down, jumped out at me the most. This was, again, Dr. David Ludwig said this. He said that, quote, "Weight gain is the price you pay for not getting diabetes on a low-quality diet," unquote. Talk to me about that.
Your body is literally saving your life by storing excess fat at certain times. What I mean by this is if you have some of the cellular inflammation that Shawn, you mentioned earlier, there are times when energy cannot get into the cells that need it in the body. It's essentially blocked from doing so. And if your body didn't have an escape hatch, let's say, of your fat cells, that energy would build up in your bloodstream and you would die, right? It's actually quite blood sugar poisoning. Might sound a little strange, but anyone who has diabetes, type 1 or type 2, knows that if too much sugar builds up in your blood, I mean, it's somewhat difficult to think about sugar killing you that fast, but too much sugar in your blood causes instant death. I mean, it's like cyanide. Your body cannot handle a lot of blood in your sugar at once. So what your body has in its brilliance is it has an escape hatch. If energy or blood sugar can't make it where it needs to go, in the vast majority of cases, barring some genetic defect, it will always find a home in your fat cells. Your fat cells will always say, look, I will provide you with a safe haven. I am the escape hatch. So when we have this low quality way of eating that we've been programmed into over the past 40 years, gaining fat is preventing you from dying from blood sugar poisoning. And that's mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, man, this is so important. The body is always, and this is the crazy thing too, as you were talking about this, I realized how resilient the human body is. You know, just look at what it's able to do to adapt, because in a sense, truly it's trying to protect us. And what you're saying is so real. Like if we have an abundance of blood glucose that the body can't handle, I mean, I can just go down a list of all manner of things that can happen instantaneously, you know, with a matter of minutes. Coma, heart attack, brain damage, the list goes on and on. So we have these very powerful, elaborate evolutionary systems that protect us. Now, here's the rub. In our environment today, it's struggles. It's not well suited to handle this much input of this type of food. It's never existed before. So let's talk about our current environment and how it's kind of feeding literally this issue.
The way that the point you just made hits me hardest, Shawn, is when you really get how toxic a lot of our modern world can be, the fact that only 70% of us are overweight, like that's the question, is How is it that only 70% of us are overweight? How is it that not 99% of us are overweight? How is it that diabetes is only 100,000% more common today than it was 100 years ago? Like, why isn't it 1,000,000% more common? And Shawn, this is just a question in general for science that we don't know the answer to, which is, similar to why is it that some people who smoke for 20 years or 40 years get lung cancer and other people don't? Like, we don't know. We don't know. And we don't know why all of us can be, in many, not all of us, 95+% malnourished, underslept, overstressed, not connected to human beings in a loving, sort of typical tribal way that human beings are meant to be, no sense of higher purpose. How can we all not be sick, sad, and overweight? And that's because the body is so resilient. And, some people's body seemingly are super resilient and other people's bodies are only pretty resilient. And the good news, though, is that resiliency is there, Shawn. And this is really important, I think, for everyone to keep in mind. And it's this resiliency, this sort of blame game that can come up. I want to try to really quickly end that by talking about kiddos for a second, because like diabesity is not just an adult only problem. Like by the way, type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. It's not called adult onset diabetes anymore. Like, newsflash, when you have to change the name of a disease from adult onset something to type 2 something because it's becoming so common in kids, that is heartbreaking. But this is my point, Shawn. If you go into a school cafeteria, it's not like the skinny kids are on treadmills eating kale and seltzer water, and the kids who aren't skinny are on their phones and eating junk food. There are a lot of kids, but 99% of the kids are on their phones and eating junk food, and some of them are overweight and developing diabetes, and some of them aren't. So, let's take the shame and blame out of this, because you look at any random sample of 100 children, of 100 teenagers, of 100 adults, 90+% of them will have low quality habits. Not their fault. This is what they've been programmed into. But only a subset of those 90% will have these disease symptoms. And Shawn, the reason that this sort of hits me so hard, and we talk about this in the film, is it embarrasses me every time to admit this, but I have to. When I was younger, are we allowed to curse on your show?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was one of those, right? I was the naturally thin guy who was like, these overweight people just need to work harder. Like, what's their problem? Get off your ass, that kind of thing. But then I got woke in a way that we need to talk about, because, this is a segment of society that is openly discriminated against still. You can be fired for being overweight in the majority of states. Like, people don't realize that, right? That's crazy. You can openly mock people for being fat in the media still. And everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. But my point is that you can very easily squash all of that by saying, look, we can all make better choices, but not everyone who is making suboptimal choices suffers from these conditions. And not everyone who is slim is making optimal choices. The vast majority of people who are slim have, guess what? I'll call it slim privilege. Like, they're just genetically freaking slim. They're not better. They're not trying harder. They are just genetically slimmer. So let's get rid of the shame. Let's get rid of the blame. And let's say there's something else going on here. There's a lot else going on culturally. There's a lot else going on genetically. And we all deserve better. So let's focus on that.
I love it, man. Thank you for that. And, we live in this culture where we have this physical symptom, and then we have our cultural response to it, which I love that you're marrying these two things together, because it's it's the whole thing. It all operates together and it feeds into each other. And I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is our body's response to our abnormal conditions are going to vary. And for a majority of folks, and this is the thing about science, they're always trying to isolate, like, what is the thing? Let's find the thing that's creating this. And it's, one of the things, the FTO gene, for example, this fat associated gene, which there's a significant portion of people who have the gene who don't become obese. And so it's kind of the interaction with the environment and the gene, but that's a whole other thing. And this is my point, is this. There was another study that was published recently, and it took a meta-analysis of a lot of this data, and it was published in Metabolic Syndrome and Related Disorders. And they affirmed that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy, so 88% of us. And so when you were asking that question, it immediately jumped out to me. Why aren't more of us, based on the way that our lives are structured right now, the cultural container that we exist in? And so part of that is the way that our bodies manifest and respond to these inputs can be different. So for me, I come from a family where 85% of my family members are obese. And I was the, quote, skinny kid in my family, but I was the one who developed an accelerated aging disorder, in a sense, by having this severe arthritis of my spine and my hips, breaking my hips when I was just a teenager. My abnormal interaction with these things manifested in this way. So I was definitely in that camp of not being metabolically healthy. And so we do have this epidemic, but for some folks it's manifesting in this way. And that's the thing about it, because I might even look, our society's definition of what healthy is. I might have looked, I'm a skinny, quote, fit kid, but metabolically healthy. But I see you and you're not metabolically healthy, clearly, because, of what I see on the surface. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
And Shawn, that's the distinction between cause and symptoms. And that's essential, because you can have more body fat than you need to be healthy and not have inflammation in your brain, and not have gut dysbiosis, and not have hormonal imbalances. And you can have all three of those things and be slim, right? Just like having a tumor, a malignant tumor growing in your body, aka cancer, like, unless a doctor sees that, there is no external necessarily appearance of that. And we so often are just judging these things externally. That's why when we say diabesity, like, diabesity is a disease. It's a disease of neurological inflammation, hormonal dysregulation, and gut dysbiosis. There are two symptoms. In some people it manifests as obesity, and in some people it manifests as diabetes. But we need to treat the brain, the gut, and the hormones, period. That's the underlying cause. So we need to move away from looking at anything external. We need to move away from treating these things as treating the symptoms. So taking metformin for diabetes, for example, could be life-saving in the short term. But the question to ask ourselves is, like, what is metformin doing to heal hypothalamic inflammation? Oh, nothing. Okay, cool. But that doesn't mean, like, I'm not here to demonize metformin. Just like if you, Shawn, if you fell right now and you got a giant gash on your arm and you wrapped a tourniquet around your arm to stop the bleeding, like, good. That tourniquet will probably keep you alive until you can get to the hospital and until you can actually enable your body to heal itself. So there are instances where, again, this is not Jonathan going up against Big Pharma. There are instances where these, for short-term symptom relief, can be necessary. But there's a difference between short-term symptom relief and treating those underlying causes. So again, this is not a problem of excess body fat. Like, stop saying that having too much fat on your body is a problem is a little bit like saying that, like, being tall, like being wide is no more of a problem in and of itself than being tall is a problem in and of itself. It is just a way the body manifests. What we need to focus on are the things underneath the surface. Like, if you're tall because you have a tumor on your pituitary gland, then maybe we do need to pay attention to the fact that you're tall. And if you're wide because your brain is on fire, we need to turn that fire in your brain off. But it's the brain, gut, and hormones that we need to be talking about, not the external appearance of people.
And when you said that, a tumor on the pituitary gland, shout out to Tony Robbins, because that's exactly what happened with him. And, it's just like he's just this big guy, but it was this underlying thing going on. And the same thing, we don't just ignore that this thing is happening. It's just like, is this life-threatening? What can we do about it? And the same context over here, is this life-threatening? What can we do about it? The problem, however, as you just touched on briefly, which is we've become so symptom-oriented. We're constantly throwing things at a symptom, and that is our model today. And let's just call it what it is. Our model is so focused on that. And there's, I don't know if you saw this report. This was 2019, $4 trillion. Okay. We can't even fathom how much that is. $4 trillion were invested in our healthcare system. And everything still continues to get worse. And it's so heavily focused on treatment. It's symptom-centric medicine, And so what you're doing, and this is what I want to ask you about. You've been somebody who's really jumped to the forefront in really addressing some of these underlying issues, because obviously what we're making our body out of in the first place plays a big part in this whole equation. And we don't even think about it in those terms. We think about it in terms of calories. And so your smash hit book, The Calorie Myth, really addressing this. And I want to ask you about this because being that our system is so calorie-centric, symptom-centric, when you start to address the fact that, yes, we can use calories as a metric, but it's not the whole story of what's coming along with food. What did you have to deal with? Because you're operating, that is very counterculture. Did you get any, did you get some rubs? Some people felt like you were rubbing their fur backwards when you were highlighting this issue. Can you share a little bit about that?
It's been an interesting, I'll say 10 years, Shawn, because there's good news and bad news, right? I independently published a book called The Smarter Science of Slim when I was still an engineer at Microsoft. And when that book came out and it started to introduce some of these things, which, these are not my theories. That book had an 88-page, 8-point font bibliography. I'm an engineer. I'm a geeky guy. I consider myself an evangelist for actual experts, like these doctors at Harvard Medical School that we worked with for the Better movie. And when that book came out, I literally was getting like hate mail of people just being like, that's crazy. Didn't you see the doctor that ate McDonald's for 12 weeks and lost weight and blah, blah, blah. And if it fits your macros, and there was all this other stuff going on and blah, blah, blah. But what's been really interesting, Shawn, is it's not the same. So fast forward 10 years. Yeah. It has gotten way better. Truly, in having even these conversations with the Harvard doctors for the film, it wasn't like, hey, things that we thought maybe like, hey, would you be willing to talk about this? And they were like, well, of course. They weren't like Setpoint. They didn't say Setpoint Theory, but Setpoint. And of course, calories behave differently in your body. And of course, food impacts health outcomes. And by that, not just 10 years, but 50 years ago, if you ask an MD who's in their 80s how food was presented to them in medical school, it was essentially presented as not relevant to health outcomes. Which, so just think about in 50 years, things can always get better, right? We're far from perfect, but I have been so shocked with the efforts we've put into this film and even some of the promotional efforts we're trying to get going for this film. The contrast and the, let's just say, acceptance, right? In the past, it felt like we were swimming upstream. But Shawn, I have to be honest with you. The number of feathers that were ruffled in like 2020 and 2021, as we promulgate this message of it's about what you're eating rather than how much you're eating, people were like, yeah, okay, yep. I mean, by and large, right? There were some outliers, but the haters were the outliers in the current, at least in my experience, whereas those people, they had the majority 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think a big part of this too is being honest about the evidence, which is hard to do because the way that we're taught, like going to a traditional university, I was taught that this is the way. And if it's not working, it's the person's fault. They're lying. It's, you know, they're not trying hard enough. But I've seen it. I've seen people come into my office in my clinical practice. They're, 5'7", 220 pounds, 35% body fat, whatever, all of these different metrics. They're already on 1,000 calorie a diet day, and their weight isn't budging. And their physician is telling them that they need to cut their calories more. And so seeing that firsthand and then having that experience and trying to rationalize it and seeing the data, which today, again, and this is what I talked about in my most recent book, we've identified specific things that we call these epicaloric controllers that literally control what calories do in your body. And I love the fact, and so seeing your film is just like, oh yeah, he's hitting on these things. One of those things being hypothalamic inflammation. Like your brain is communicating with your gut, literally this interaction telling your body, hey, we don't have that much stored. Can you go ahead and your brain can literally tell your gut to increase the assimilation of calories from your food or decrease it just based on the perception of your reserves for both nutrients and quote energy, which we've just given this label to calories. And the reason that I wanted to ask you about this is that there are still folks, of course, who are like living and dying by this framework. And part of it is because they've gotten results themselves, and which is great. And that's the thing. It doesn't negate the fact that this can't be used as a healthful metric, but look at the results as a society. I've seen firsthand in my clinical practice, hundreds, even thousands of folks they've tried. They're cutting calories. They're doing the exercise, and something is off. The idea of it is clearly not working broadly. And so let's talk a little bit more about why this is, because this is getting into why this film matters. Partially, of course, is highlighting the science and what's going on behind the scenes with our metabolism. And part of it is addressing the cultural phenomenon of demonizing the people and blaming them, when what we really have is a cultural container that is literally feeding the problem of disease.
The biggest distinction that I feel we make in this film, because a lot of people, and we even had to categorize it this way with our distributor, is it's a nutrition documentary, it's a food documentary. But interestingly enough, it's actually a film about shame. And this is really important because when we talk about these disease states, Shawn, if you, and you may have had this experience, right? If you tell somebody who is actually suffering in a state of shame to eat less and exercise more, like here's my position to people on the internet who are like, if it fits your macros, eat less, exercise more, whatever. You are whatever. Like, it's not even a relevant conversation to the vast majority of people who are suffering from this disease, because the ultimate cause, like, so this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. The ultimate cause of hypothalamic inflammation, the ultimate cause of hormonal dysregulation, and the ultimate cause of gut dysbiosis is one word: shame. Because if you feel shame, you might not even realize it. If you don't feel that you are worth better, if you don't feel like you are worth the quality of inputs, you will never engage in those activities. And this may sound a little like, what's he talking about? But like, look at the way we've changed our cultural perception of addiction. So like, look at the opioid epidemic, right? People who have a heroin addiction, like, just take less heroin? Like, is that how, if you would just take less heroin, you wouldn't have an opioid problem anymore? Like, just take your oxy, cut it in half, take less oxy. That's the answer to your problem, right? No. we as a culture, and pretty quickly, have become woke to the fact that you don't have a opiate problem. You have another problem which you're treating with opiates. And until we address that other problem, which is shame-based, right? One of the most well-known shame researchers in the world, Dr. Brene Brown, says that in her research, they can't even delineate where shame stops and addiction starts. Like the correlation between abuse of substances that have a neurological impact and the emotion of shame almost seem to be one and the same. So if we feel this emotion of shame deeply, if we feel a lack of worth as an individual, we will, from a survival perspective, try to alleviate that neurological state with something. Some of us use opiates. Some of us use sugar. Some of us use sex. Some of us use work. Some of us use exercise. Some of us use video games. So ultimately, and this is why, Shawn, I mean, I used to get in arguments about nutrition a lot. At this point, I'm just like, look, it's semi not even a nutrition problem. It's a shame problem first, because once you get over that, like once you realize that you are a miracle, once you realize that you are intrinsically worth better, like you're not going to put garbage in a Ferrari. You're just not going to do that. You're just not going to do that. So for me, Shawn, I sometimes feel like even the conversations, like I'm sorry for not like giving you a scientific, well, that is a scientific answer to your question, but like the answer that I would have given 5 years ago to like, what do you say to the people who are like, if it fits your macros? At this point, I almost feel sad. Like I don't pity them. That's not the right term, but I feel sad because like they have all this energy and passion and it's pointing in the wrong direction. Right? Like they're focused on the wrong problem. And because of that, they'll never actually help the people who need help the most. Does that make any sense?
Of course, of course. So I think it's important for us to understand, and this is the biggest takeaway that I got from that, is that we could talk about all the stuff that people should be doing. And it could be true. And it can be whether it's a calorie counting paradigm or whether it's a healing the metabolism paradigm. None of it matters if we don't address the perception of the person about themselves. That's where the real work ultimately, and this is just a fact of life, because the human psyche itself, we're all driven to do things that are congruent with who we believe ourselves to be. That's the heart of everything. This whole reality that we're living, each and every person listening or watching right now, is living and doing actions, having thoughts. We think thoughts based on who we believe ourselves to be and the world to be around us. And so if we're not addressing this, we're just literally we're doing things that are superficial and window dressing, hoping we stumble our way into health. And so the paradigm that we live in right now is a weight loss paradigm so that we can accidentally get healthy. When in reality, we need to talk about getting healthy and having weight loss be an outcome. But part of getting healthy is getting healthy about our mind and who we see ourselves to be. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly right, Shawn. That's exactly right. And we are in an epidemic of shame. And this sort of shame alleviation protocol, like you can put a TM next to that. Someone that's what we need to work towards. And I don't mean to get too dark, but I do want to be real. Like one of the, the film Better has like 3 things happening in it. One is the exploration with 4 of the top doctors at the Harvard Medical School. Another portion is 20 plus real life individuals who are going through this they're at different phases in this diabesity journey. And then another is a story about my experience, why I'm so passionate about this. But one of the things that came so clear in working with these individuals, Shawn, and again, I don't want to get too dark, but I do want to be real, is, people are like, how many blueberries should I eat? And you start to talk to that person, like you talk to them maybe like hour 3, like really talking with them, and you realize like that their uncle raped them repeatedly when they were 7. And you're like, your question has nothing to do with blueberries. Like, your relationship with your body and yourself and food, until you even realize that worrying about like the number of blueberries you're eating is so not relevant to us fundamentally addressing this once and for all. Like, we need to heal the trauma and the shame that is causing a compulsion towards decisions which you know you deserve better than. And Shawn, here's like, that was pretty, here's a different way of thinking about it. Most people would never feed their dog what they feed themselves. They perceive their dog as this beautiful, unconditionally loving, amazing creature. That is, it's an external manifestation of love to them. And so if they saw someone giving a dog Mountain Dew, they could be the most timid person in the world. They'd probably say something. But they wouldn't think twice about giving themselves Mountain Dew. So what is the difference in the mind that says that, this mammal is so intrinsically worth whatever, that I would never put these substances in their body? But this other mammal, me, well, you got to do what you got to do. What is causing that distinction? And that is what we need to get to the heart of.
This brings us to the film itself. Obviously, again, the film is amazing. It's in that medium that folks can send to other people. They can watch with their family. They can get this information. And it's also, there's some portions that are dramatizations of real life situations and actors. And it's just really well put together with the documentary style data coming from the different researchers and scientists, physicians. And so, question just leading into this, why did you create this film right now at this time? And what, I think it's important for people to understand what it takes. The reason I'm asking you this is that to create a film with this level of production, what drove you to do it, and why now?
2 questions there. One is sort of what motivated the film, and then also just like why the medium of film. The reason I wanted to make a film, well, the 2 reasons. One is there's an old joke: why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So, why create a film? Because that's where the eyeballs are. Like, there's not a lot of people that read 300-page books, like, unfortunately, right? So, if we could tweet out this information efficiently or TikTok it, we'd do that. But, we can't. So movie is the next best medium. But fundamentally, Shawn, I had a lot of conversations with people who have, when you think about it, like very, very challenging dietary practices. So, for example, I'm not endorsing, disendorsing. I'm not saying anything about the practice itself. Being a vegan is objectively hard. Like, a lot of effort goes into eating no form of animal products at all. Being kosher in the United States is not a simple thing to do. Being halal in the United States is not a simple thing to do. So when you speak and having a whole family, a multi-generational family, do these things consistently, independent of holidays, independent, like, how do you do it at school? They figure it out. How do they do that? Well, for a lot of these people, there is a deep underlying emotional or spiritual reason this is happening, right? Very clearly, when you have a religious affiliation, kosher, halal, it's a very clear religious reason, spiritual reason you're eating a certain way. People who are vegan, for example, oftentimes there's a deep sort of spiritual reason they're doing this. And those spiritual reasons are triggered by emotion. And how do we cause an emotional reaction? How do we cause an emotional trigger in people? Well, cinema is a great way to do that. And a lot of people, specifically around, like, let's say the consumption of animal products, if you if you ask people who may not consume animals, like, why don't you consume animals? They will often give, if you really get down to it, they saw something. They visually saw something. And in seeing that, it in an instant, it caused the way they perceive food and themselves and the world permanently. They couldn't unsee it. So we thought to ourselves, what if we could create a visual mechanism that it wasn't about this diet or that diet, but it was about causing this moment, this visual resonance, this moment of transformation, where in that moment, assumptions and perceptions of the world broke and light for a new and better way of perceiving yourself and food could emerge. So that's a long soliloquy about we went through the visual medium and the medium of film because we believe that fundamentally hitting individuals, like, look, the head is important, but if you really study human behavior change, it's a function of the heart. It is absolutely a function of the heart. And if I'll make a promise about this film, if you watch this film and it doesn't hit you in the heart at all, like, I will personally call you and apologize, because, you know, we're not trying to make it saccharine sweet. We weren't trying to hit you in the heart, but when you really get down to it, like, if you really talk to someone who's addicted to opioids, it's going to hit you in the heart. If you talk to someone who's an alcoholic and you really get to the root cause of why they suffer with that, it's going to hit you in the heart. And if you talk to individuals who suffer with diabesity and you figure out really what's causing that fundamentally and the impact that it has on them day to day, it's going to hit you in the heart. And I feel like if we can open up people's hearts, their heads will be more receptive to the information we now need to make the change we need to save all the lives we need to. And that's why we went the film route.
And I gotta reiterate how it definitely did that. Same thing for me watching the film. It's brand new, and I would love if you could tell folks how they can be able to watch this amazing film.
Please just go to bettermovie.com. It's going to be the hub, a very simple site where you can figure out, you know, where you can pre-order it, when you can pre-order it, when you can actually watch it, because we're going to constantly be releasing it on new platforms as it becomes available. It's going to be available first for pre-order exclusively on iTunes starting May 1st, and then May 25th it will be available on Apple platforms as well as Google platforms, but we're going to continue to roll it out to other places as is capable from a legal perspective. It's a whole thing we're learning, but just go to bettermovie.com, bettermovie.com. That's the best way to stay up to date on where and how to live better and watch the better movie.
Perfect. So as of this recording, you guys have got a little bit of time to access some of the pre-order for the film. He's got some cool bonuses there for that. So, but regardless of when you're watching it, jump over to bettermovie.com to be able to access the film. And man, it's just so good, so important. And coming out at this time when health isn't that much of a conversation, like what we can actually do and really addressing the fundamental things that are controlling all of this stuff. It's such a great time for this to be coming out. And, you know, I've known you for quite some time. Your original book, The Smarter Science of Slim, classic. I was right there. That's when I got introduced to you, man. And just to see all the impact that you've made over the years and just really staying true to the science and continue to evolve yourself. You said something earlier that really stood out. You said, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, this would have been, you know, and now you're really getting to literally the heart of where these transformations come from, and your ability to do it, man, is just going to keep going to another level. So I just appreciate you so much, man.
I appreciate the opportunity, Shawn. Thank you so much.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
At the end of the study, they found that when individuals were well rested, they burned 55% more body fat just by getting more sleep. And so the question is, how does this happen?